Hello, and welcome to the MKG podcast, the podcast that helps marketers grow their businesses using the 4 M's, the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. I'm your host, Carrie Gard, and to help me introduce today's guests, I have our account director, Jenna Hassenkamp. Jenna, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jenna, in your pre-MKG experience, have you done RFPs?
I have done RFPs. I've also been leading teams when some of the team members have been pulled off for RFPs. So kind of on both sides of the coin, being impacted by it and leading it. And RFPs are crazy.
to say the least. When doing these RFPs, whether you were leading them or writing them yourself, what would you say some of the challenges you faced as an account director were?
Well, first, RFPs are crazy, but they can be fun because they're typically an agency's idea without any client feedback or a lot of reality having to be taken into consideration. So when it's with a creative agency, which was most of my experience with RFPs in the past, they tend to be grandiose and very creative. So a lot of fun. I've even seen custom-made puppets done for an RFP. I mean, There really is nothing you can't do to try and go all out and convince a client to sign with you. But as a result, they are huge time and money suck. And what ends up happening is people are taking off their regular client work to work on this non-paying project. So existing clients end up paying for it somewhat. And then if you actually win the RFP, and there's always a good chance you won't because it's usually you and multiple other agencies, then you're trying to recoup your time and money put into the RFP pitch, which is usually considerable, remember those custom puppets, through your contract with a new client. And I've seen it even when a big name brand is the client and they consider that their name is sort of a reward for the agency winning the business, like they'll get more agency business from working with this client. So then they make their contracts even smaller and at times even not profitable. So then the whole, all the other clients are footing the bill. So RFPs are just across the board, in my opinion, not a great situation for anybody, whether you're the client, the agency, or other clients at the agency.
I would agree with that. I've certainly had my own RFP experiences, mostly where I'm on the other side of it, where I wasn't part of all of the RFPs. I was the person who had to figure out how to take this client on after the RFP was won. And usually what was promised versus what we would actually do didn't align, which was also sort of this tricky happenstance from where I sat over the years. But that's who our guests are today. Our guests, Ashley Cohen and Sabrina Galati, started a company called 10x4 to basically combat this exact thing when it comes to RFPs, and mostly around the fact that the client's asking for something specific and sometimes they don't even know what they're asking for, and then trying to align them with the right agency who's actually going to fit their needs is just brilliant in my opinion. And I think it combats a lot of these challenges we're talking about. And what's really cool about Ashley and Sabrina is they are sitting exactly where you and I are, Jenna, actually. One of them actually was part of the RFP process while the other was on the other side, picking up sort of the pieces once the RFP was won, so to speak. So it's they have a wonderful story. I love everything they have to say, and I love this challenge that they're trying to essentially solve. So let's listen from Ashley and Sabrina from 10x4. Ashley and Sabrina, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you because I think you're out to solve a challenge, a big challenge, one that I've certainly faced in my previous agency life, for sure. So why don't we kick off with you both telling us about where you came from and where you worked and what jobs you had, and we can start there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sabrina Galati, and I've been in the advertising business for about 20 years, mainly in the last 10 years kind of serving executives, kind of senior executive roles. I ran, media teams and worked at some of the larger holding companies, and then also worked at some independent shops as well. And I've been in the business for quite some time and felt like I didn't want to just leave the business without causing or creating some kind of impact. And that's kind of the reason why I kind of became an entrepreneur and ventured off on my own to solve some big challenges that are within our industry that can be done when I was on the agency side and some of the work that I was doing. So happy to kind of go off on my own and try something different and hoping that it will impact our industry in a really powerful way.
Well, you're not completely off on your own. Hi, I'm Ashley Cohen. I have also been in the advertising realm for a long while now. Everything from the vendor side. I actually started in print, funny enough, at a local newspaper a bunch of years back, and have worked my way through the vendor side, from big publishers to smaller independent shops, and then spent a bunch of years also on the agency side running new business. I met Sabrina at about 2012 or so when she moved back to the Bay Area, and I actually sold her leads at one of the different publishers that I was working at the time. And we started our relationship back then, and then started 10x4 about a year ago, right, Sabrina?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 10x4 was started because we felt like we've always been focused on the need of efficiencies. And so when we were thinking about it, we're like, how do we be more effective? Well, first off, we have to think about the actual workday. You're really effective from the time period of from 10 to 4, because as you're walking in and you're sort of trying to adjust to the day, and it's not the most productive time period. So I always tell my teams, don't put a meeting on the calendar at 9 o'clock because you're not going to get my fresh brain, or don't put a meeting on the calendar at 4 because your brain is on exit mode. So 10 to 4 was really sort of the more effective time period. And so when we thought about coming up with a name for what we truly believe in, which is finding those efficiencies, we came up with 10 to 4. That was taken. Then we went 10x4. And when you think about it, 10 times 4 equals 40, which is a 40-hour work week.
Perfect.
We have all these crazy ways of thinking about kind of the name, but most importantly, our kind of what we believe in is really helping marketers, kind of help them be more effective, help them find answers to very complex business challenges, and we want to be that solution for them. And if it's through finding the right partnership and relationship, through some of the things that we do in a more effective ways that will ultimately help them save dollars, in the long run. That's what we believe in, and that's why we started 10x4.
Yes, we had a great conversation, and I actually saw the reason I got in touch with Ashley is because she wrote this great post. Ashley, you wrote this post on LinkedIn, and it was all about the RFP process and how it is broken, which I couldn't agree more with, and we'll get into that in a second. But in terms of efficiencies, that is definitely one way you guys approach that. And for our listeners, they should definitely go check out the post. But Ashley, can you just give them a rundown of what that post meant and where it came from?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined 10x4 a few months back, what we are really trying to solve is this issue with the broken agency RFP process. And for us, what it really means is actually fixing broken relationships in the industry as well. And so let me kind of talk through that whole process. So, and first I'll say that marketers now are just tasked with so much. They have to wear so many hats. They have to be experts at so many things, whether it be vendors that are available in the landscape, or technologies, or data sets, or websites, or operations, or brand. They're just tasked with knowing so much, and they only really run an agency RFP maybe once, twice, 3 times in their career, so they can't be expected to be experts at it, let alone the procurement-led RFPs that are a whole other ballgame too, which I can talk a bit about. But what we saw is, just as a quick background, I ran new business at an agency for a while. Sabrina was heavily involved in that, as well as our other business partner. And what we saw was that every time we received an RFP from a brand, there was one consistent thing among all of them. And that is that the client really didn't understand. And what that results from is a lack of internal stakeholder alignment. So when we would get an RFP, it was clear that the brand didn't have internal stakeholder alignment. As a result of that, they put together a list of questions that didn't really go back to addressing or solving that key business issue because they weren't really sure what that was. So they ask a bunch of random questions that they maybe find on Google or that they used at an RFP or for an RFP at a previous company or they got from a friend. And then they bring to the table a bunch of different agencies that are not specifically built to solve that key business issue. And so they bring agencies to the table that maybe they've worked with in the past, or maybe they were referred to by a friend or colleague, or they find on a Google search or an Ad Age article or whatever it might be. But again, billable client hours that are then dedicated to, filling out this RFP, answering, dozens of questions and maybe Word or Excel, putting together numerous case studies, building decks. They spend so many days, weeks, hours putting together these responses. And then, maybe the client whittles it down to a few that they invite in to pitch. And ultimately, they end up picking the agency that they like the pitch team the best. But most of the time, those folks that are in the pitch are not actually the people from the agency that are going to be working on your business. Mm-hmm. And so there's this ripple effect where they've, weren't sure what they were solving for at the very, very beginning. They created a brief that didn't, go back to that issue they were trying to solve. They brought agencies to the table that aren't built to fit that business need. And then they pick an agency that they just like the pitch team the best, but those are the folks not working on the business. And so right from the get-go, the agency and client relationship is not set up for success. In some cases it works and people are very lucky, but in other cases it doesn't. And it's very much trying to fit a square peg, round hole.
Yeah.
So there's right off the bat, there's, the frustrations between the client and the agency. And then there's this negative ripple effect in the industry where the agency then starts being difficult to the vendors and maybe more demanding or asking for free things to do make goods because the client isn't happy about something. And so what we saw was if we could fix the very beginning, if we could fix the RFP, that we could actually have massive impact in the industry by creating better relationships. So if we have internal stakeholder alignment and everybody is aligned and running in the same direction, and then we create a brief that goes back to that initial problem that the client is trying to solve for, and then we bring agencies to the table who are specifically built to solve that key business issue, then we could actually have a positive ripple effect in the industry where the relationships are set up for success, where you can be that strategic partner, where you are like the round peg, round hole situation,
yes,
rather than round peg, square hole, other way around, but you know what I mean. And we could actually create, as Sabrina put, that impact in the industry by fixing this broken process. It was mind-blowing to us, and we've seen great success with it, and we're really excited about the change that we're helping to create.
Yeah, I've certainly experienced it in my past of being on the other side where I'm not part of the pitch team, but I'm part of the people who are getting the client off of the pitch team where all these promises were made. And I'm like, that's not how I would approach this at all. And now we're completely off base in what I think we need to do versus what was pitched. Because sometimes what's pitched too is like these big shiny objects and these big ideas and then the client comes to the actual team who's going to be doing the doing, and they're like, we want more leads. And it's like, well, this big shiny object over here that was promised to you isn't going to do that. And so what I'm proposing is something completely different. and that doesn't sometimes land because it's just what they were promised versus what was delivered is now two different things. And now now the client and I aren't meshing, and how are we supposed to get along? And the deal then falls through, and it's a complete cascade effect of what happens. And that's why at MKG we actually don't RFP, because the other problem with it is that then you're building an entire team just to RFP, and they're not even billable, right? And so if the deal
Right.
falls through from an agency perspective, you've lost thousands of dollars in the pitch, and you're never going to recoup, essentially. And so that's definitely, and then the third problem is that we've done pitches before we promised no RFPs. We've done pitches where then our ideas were taken and executed on by a completely different team, which was also incredibly heartbreaking. So yes to all of these things and why the RFP process is broken. And I'm so glad somebody's taking this by the reins and pulling it in to say there's a better way. And I love what you guys are talking about in terms of starting with the initial stakeholders, and who are the stakeholders that you're talking to? Are you talking to marketing managers? Are you talking to who are you talking to in building this brief?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very, it initially comes from our discovery process. We find that typically it can be various marketers within the organization, and sometimes depending on how large the ask is, it could be global alignment as well. And in most cases, also procurement. So getting global sourcing to understand that we're actually trying to help, we're going to ultimately make their jobs easier. They would just have to run the process. So it's not just from a marketing standpoint, it's also utilizing and getting global sourcing, so procurement, to be on our side as well. And once we have all those folks kind of feeling good about what we can do for them, that's where sort of we move on to the next phase of discovery and really understanding and getting to the core of why they are looking for a new relationship. What does the business need? So yeah, the alignment really does start at that level, but it can vary. It can go all the way from various functions in marketing and then bringing in procurement as well.
And how do you align? It's so funny. I just got off another podcast conversation where we were talking about this, where even the marketing teams are so big with all their own different, sub teams essentially under that. And they're not always even aligned. They all have their own agendas essentially and priorities. And so with you guys coming in to find that partner that's going to sort of help all those teams and go towards the same direction, how do you sort of help cross those lines and bring everybody into a single place? Or do you not? Or are you trying to solve multiple problems? What does that look like?
Typically, I mean, it's very important to govern that process, as effectively as we can, as efficiently as we can. So we'll have a document that sort of asks very specific questions, and we would send that to all the different folks that will have some kind of a stake in making the decision. And so that will help us understand from that document what the core issues are. Once we pull out those core issues, that's where we would, get all the parties, on a call, and we sort of explain to them based on the data that we've collected. We saw that there's 4 really key themes that we noticed that came through in this discovery document. And so once we get alignment there, that's where we realize that it really kind of starts in, as Ashley said, from an agency standpoint, building that effective brief. Well, the same holds true when you're trying to get alignment in an organization. You have to have a kind of a governing piece of a document where everyone sort of weighs in, has their input, and then we use that as a way to kind of help us understand what the issues are. Everything that we do is driven by data. So we take all that information, we process it, we try to analyze exactly what the issues are, and then we surface that up. And when we get everybody's agreement that these are the 4 things we need to solve for, we immediately get alignment across an organization that can range from 4 different marketing decision makers to about 15 different decision makers with various functions globally.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of moving pieces that you got to coordinate, and then trying to find, I mean, is it always a single agency you're sort of looking for to solve these problems, or do you sometimes find you need multiple partners to solve different problems?
It depends on what the initiatives are. Sometimes it could be looking for one agency or the recommendation, because we're practitioners, so we know how to sort of look at what the core issues are and give their advice back to the client and say, you need multiple agencies that are very specific in each of these different functions that we would need to help you source. So it kind of depends. It all depends on what we get back from the client.
I have so many questions floating in my head. I'm trying to sort through them and get to one. Because I want to get really tactical at the same time. I want to pull up really high, because it sounds so daunting to think about how it sounds like you have a really good process in place, but then how do you, okay, so you get in front of all of these stakeholders, all of them, and I'm sure that there are many, and with all different opinions, you put together this brief, you get them on the same page, and then what? How do you get to the agencies? Do you already have a list? Do you go out and do you do a lot of research? What's the process, and then getting to the right agency to solve the right problem?
Great question. That's exactly what I was thinking to talk about next as well. So we have a database of agency partners currently, which is constantly growing. There's about, 1,200 or so agencies in the US alone. So getting to know each one of them is incredibly important. And what I'll say is this, we've done a lot of research and gotten to know a lot of agencies, and it is almost mind-blowing how similarly every agency positions themselves. And that's not a hit at the agencies at all. But right now there's some really big phrases like growth-minded and performance-based and customer-obsessed or customer-centric and transparency. And reading through every single one of these agency websites, it's hard to differentiate each one, So what we've done is we've set up, and because we come from agencies and because we come from the client side and because we come from the vendor side, we can have really specific conversations with these agencies to understand what they're really good at. And so that's what we have done and we continue to do, is to get to know the agencies really intimately, so that when we're pulling together a short list of possible agency partners, that we're bringing to the table agencies that are specifically built to fit the needs of our clients. And I'll give you some examples. Over the past several months, we've talked to many, many, many agencies, and a couple of weeks back, we met this agency that's out in Denver, for example. And they are a creative agency that does a little bit of media too, but we found out in that conversation that they actually have a real specialty in the mental health care space. And they even have a psychiatrist on staff to make sure that they are appropriate in the way that they are addressing that market. A couple of days ago, I spoke with an agency out in Southern California, and they are a creative agency, but they really are growing their vertical around plant-based initiatives, really, really interested in the vegan space. Or a woman I spoke with out in New York a few days or weeks back, and they really specialize in reaching the gaming world. And they don't have to be, a gamer brand, but brands that are trying to reach that audience. Not to mention all of the different agencies out there that specialize in maybe video or B2B tech or reaching, moms or whoever it is. What we're intimately trying to understand is, what are you really good at? And we also are really encouraging our agency partners to, if they get a brief from us and they're not nodding their heads the whole time saying, oh my God, this is perfect for us, this is exactly what we do, decline the brief. Because we only want to bring agencies to the table that are uniquely designed to fit the needs of our clients. because that goes back to our whole principle, right? Where we're trying to create more strategic, better, more successful relationships in the industry. And so, like, in that sense, we're, professional B2B matchmakers. And so we want to connect the two companies, the agency and the brand, and really set everybody up for success. We have to know what the agencies are good at.
And we're,
Yeah, it's interesting because in hearing you talk too, and the agencies all do similar things, right? We all do SEO, PPC, analytics, build websites, PR, whatever the case may be. From a tactical standpoint, it's all very similar growth mindset. What's interesting is it sounds like more and more agencies are becoming experts in audience demographics, like of who people are and what their needs are and what problems and challenges that brands are out to solve for that specific group of people. And the more niche you are, the better at it you are, right? Because you're not trying to understand moms, you're trying to understand millennial moms in the Pacific Northwest, which, let me tell you, they are very different than people on the East Coast. So, really carving that out and being niche about not only what it is you do and not being a yes man to, we do everything, we are a full service agency, but to say we are great at these specific things to this specific audience is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the trend that we're noticing is it's going to get very difficult for the agencies that are claiming full service because a lot of clients we're noticing are taking services in-house. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that. It's because, they, either they've been frustrated with an agency relationship because agencies are tasked with working on multiple clients, and typically there's not a dedicated resource that's working on their paid social or their search initiatives. So clients are forced to take a lot of that work in-house. However, there will still always be a need for a level of expertise because agencies they have the beauty and the benefit of being exposed to the different data partners that are out there, the different technical pieces that are out there. And if they can focus on one thing that they're really good at, whether it's a specific type of audience, then they can formulate their practice completely around that so that when the client does take channels and disciplines in-house, that agency still has a level of expertise that they still can be in market for. So there's different types of trends that we're noticing that we also have to adjust the model accordingly. But that's definitely where we're kind of noticing the claim of we do everything is kind of a scary space to be in for a few, for some of the agencies out there.
And to add to that too, one of the byproducts of what we're doing that we've seen that's been a surprise to us, to be frank, is some of our more B2B tech clients, for example, who have historically worked with more B2B tech focused agencies, have actually shifted, and for them to be competitive in the industry, and for them to stand out from the crowd, they've actually had to shift the types of partners that they work with. And historically, if you were to take a sample set of different B2B tech brands advertisements and take the logo off of each one of those ads, you wouldn't actually be able to tell one brand from the other. And so some of the larger B2B tech companies have been drowning. They're, the challenger brands are coming in, doing more edgy, creative, out of the box things, and they're the ones standing out now. And so while they may have, really pinned and, been able to really successfully build relationships with the B2B tech buyer, with that whole buying committee, they really understand how to talk to the B2B tech buyer. They may, frankly, they haven't been able to connect with the person who is the B2B tech buyer. And so as we've been doing some RFP processes for some of the larger B2B tech brands, we've actually watched them start to gravitate more towards edgier, consumer-focused agencies, agencies that haven't been as B2B focused maybe in the past, to really help their brand elevate itself and to help them reach the B2B tech buyer in his or her personal life, maybe at their favorite sporting game or in new and unique ways. That has been a shift that we have been surprised by, pleasantly, of course, and that we hope to continue to see in the industry. And I think that that is some of the value that we've brought to our clients is they would have never have brought those types of agencies to the table. They would have never have been part of the initial consideration set if we didn't bring them to the table. And that's been some of the feedback that we've gotten from our clients around their extreme gratitude that we even thought to bring in these edgier, more independent, more nimble and agile brands, agencies to help elevate their brand and bring them to the next level.
Well, I think that's interesting because at the end of the day, we are all consumers. We're not all B2B. We don't all work in the B2B space necessarily, but we are all consumers. And even more importantly than that, we are all human. And I have to say, in my latest podcast conversations, there is this giant shift that's happening, I think, across everything that's happening in the working world, especially in B2B, where it is becoming more of a connection that needs to happen between from individuals to companies to brand to consumers. There has to be this human element that happens, and B2B tends to get really dry and really straightforward, and it sort of loses that human element where consumer plays on that all the time. And so I think that's really cool to hear that this is I'm not only am I seeing it, but it really is this thing that's happening, and that there's this trend that's coming, and agencies have to start to think differently in order to continue to play in the B2B space.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in B2B, because the consumer space, to your point, that it's very easy to tap into the psychographics of who who the actual customer is, versus in the B2B space, you do have to make things humanly relevant to really kind of cut through the clutter of speeds and feeds. So that's one of the main things that we've noticed, and we're so excited about this trend, particularly in B2B, and how we can help our clients.
Well, this has been great, and I totally a big fan of breaking up with the RFP and figuring out what brands really need at their core across all of their teams, and then finding the right agency and solution to go meet that. I think this has been a need, and it's so nice to finally see 10x4 taking it by the horns and leading the way in it. So thank you so much, Ashley and Sabrina, for coming on and joining me in this conversation. And I look forward to watching you along the way.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So that was my conversation with Ashley Cohen and Sabrina Galati. Jenna, I said this in the interview, but we don't RFP for a whole host of reasons, and I share my opinion loudly in this interview. But I'd really love to hear from you as somebody a bit more in the weeds, so to speak, with the team on how how not doing RFPs has impacted the team and essentially avoiding them. What's been the impact and what's the outcome of that?
So the way that I see it come up the most often is occasionally we'll have a client who starts asking an existing client for estimating out potential projects, where they're looking for budget, strategy, and projected results. Since we don't do creative, this tends to be more the realm that we get asked for. And I start paying attention to the frequency and the amount of effort put into those, because I'm absolutely not against having a proposal for a project put together for an existing client or a new client either. But when they start to be multiple without it coming to fruition, and I notice that it's starting to take a toll on the bandwidth that the team has to actually work on their business or other clients' business, so taking too much time away from there, that's when my little warning bells go off, and I have a conversation. I don't have a magic number. It's just really a feeling of looking at the frequency and the effort. And I have experienced that clients at MKG have always gotten it right away when I let them know we don't do RFPs, and that the proposals that they're asking for are starting to take that kind of effort. And that it means that we're taking the team away from doing actual work for them and for other clients. And after a few requests, that it just adds up. And I've never had a client not respond positively to that, because I think that at the end of the day, they appreciate the fact that I'm not taking the team away from their work to work on these proposals, which means I'm not taking the team away from their business to work on other proposals. It really is the big picture of it. And I think what we do at MKG to support a prospective client who isn't ready to sign a long-term contract, because I think that's also what RFPs are, is their way to draw out the experience and test out different agencies and figure out the right chemistry fit. Is what we'll do is we'll work with them to outline a shorter term contract. So that way we can see if we're a good chemistry match and determine if we do have the same vision for priorities and strategy, because that's not always apparent with a proposal. And, it can be a little tricky because, as we love to say, SEO is a marathon and not a sprint. And even PPC can take a while to get optimized and going. But it's still helpful sometimes for a new client to get comfortable with us or get their leadership team on board. Sometimes that's the holdup. And I think it's a good solution to meet that need of the client wanting to make an informed long-term decision with a new agency partner, but also ensuring that we aren't putting our team or existing clients in an unfair position.
Well said, and I couldn't agree more. And I'm really proud of the fact that we've sort of stuck to our guns over this, because I do think it has paid off from a transparency and trust standpoint, and really, taking the time to get to know those clients thoughtfully rather than, going through this whole RFP process to, up against other agencies, pulling all those resources for potentially something not happening and putting that strain on the team and our existing clients as well. So I think we've done a really good job. I'm really proud of us, and I'm really excited about what Ashley and Sabrina have going on, so that more companies can get the bit, not only can, other agencies get the businesses that fit, but the clients could actually get what they need. That's a big point that Ashley and Sabrina talked about of, clients will sometimes just choose who they like, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the results they're looking for. And they really combat that. So thank you, Ashley and Sabrina. Thank you, Jenna, for joining me. And thank you, listeners. Always. And thank you, listeners, for listening to the MKG podcast, the podcast that helps marketers grow their businesses using the 4 M's, the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. I'm your host, Carrie Gard, and until next time.